Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are cracking open a book that gives you a front row seat to the collapse of a 600-year-old empire. We're talking about Zeytindağı, Falih Rıfkı Atay's absolutely gripping eyewitness account of the Ottoman Empire's final chaotic days in World War I. All right, let's get into it. And right off the bat, you see why this book is so incredibly powerful. Asadi actually waited until 1932 to publish it. So why wait? Well, enough time had passed that he could finally tell the whole story. Not the propaganda, not the heroic myths, but the raw, unfiltered truth of what he saw. This isn't just a memoir, it's a historical reckoning. So here's our journey for today. First, we're going to unpack what makes this book feel so raw and immediate, even now. Then we'll meet our guide, Falih Rıfkı Atay, and see the empire's end through his eyes. From there, we'll dive into his searing portraits of the three men who basically ran the empire into the ground, see the horrific price of their folly, and finally, really understand the book's timeless warning. So what do we mean by a book of bitter truths? Well, this isn't just a random collection of war stories. Ateş wrote this specifically for the new generation of Turks, kids who grew up in the new republic with no memory of the empire. He wanted to show them exactly what was lost, and, more importantly, how it was all lost. Even the title, Zeytindağı, is crucial. It means Mount of Olives, and it wasn't just a poetic choice. It was the actual location of the Fourth Army's headquarters in Jerusalem, set up in a German-built sanatorium. This was the nerve center, and it's from this exact spot that Atay watched the empire begin to crumble from the inside. So who is this guy giving us this incredible inside look? Let's meet Falih Rıfkı Atay. And you have to understand, he wasn't just any soldier. He was a journalist by trade, a political insider, which means he had a uniquely critical eye for everything happening around him. You can see his whole life put him at the center of the storm. He starts as a writer, gets called up as a reserve officer, and then, and this is the key part, he becomes aide-de-camp, basically the personal assistant, to Cemal Pasha, one of the three most powerful men in the entire empire. After the war, he jumps right back into journalism, even co-founding a major newspaper. This is a man who knows power, and he knows how to tell a story. And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? His job put him in the room where the big decisions were being made. He wasn't stuck in a trench somewhere hearing things secondhand. No, he was right there at headquarters, on the Mount of Olives, watching and listening and taking note of all the vanity and incompetence that was sealing the empire's fate. And right at the center of that incompetence were three men. They were known as the triumvirate of the Committee of Union and Progress, and they held the empire's destiny in their hands. Evrati's portraits of them are just absolutely devastating because he knew them personally. He saw them up close. Let's break them down. First, you had Atay's own boss, Cemal Pasha, who he called the autocrat. He was this showy, power-mad ruler of Syria. Then there was Enver Pasha, the dictator, a man completely driven by these grandiose, almost messianic visions of a new Turkish empire. And finally, you had Talat Pasha, the party leader, the practical one, the guy who saw lying and cruelty as just tools of the trade. I mean, look at this. Atay captures Cemal Pasha's absolute power with this one chilling quote. In his territory, Syria, there was no law but his own will. What is law? I make it, I break it. It just perfectly shows the sheer arrogance of the man. And then you have Enver Pasha. This quote really says it all. For him, this wasn't just politics, it was a holy mission. He genuinely believed he was chosen by God himself to forge this massive new Turkish empire. It was a dangerous fantasy that dragged the Ottomans into a war they had no chance of winning. Talat Pasha is maybe the most complicated of the three. Atay describes him as someone who, by the standards of the day, was seen as a virtuous leader, a real man of the people. But in the very next breath, Atay points out that for Talat, the ends always justified the means. Lying, cruelty, those weren't moral failings, they were just moves on the chessboard. So you have these three men with their egos and their grand ambitions. But what was the cost? What was the actual result on the ground? This is where the book gets truly gut-wrenching, showing the massive disconnect between the leader's dreams and the soldier's reality. The contrast is it's staggering. Up at headquarters, they're talking about conquering Egypt. What Atay actually sees are Ottoman soldiers dying of thirst in the Sinai desert before they even get near Egypt. They talk about defending the holy cities. He sees Medina as a corrupt hub for smugglers. They preach imperial unity. He witnesses the start of the Great Arab Revolt against them. And the details he shares are just nightmarish. Soldiers trying to survive on nothing but peximet, a dry, hard bread, so malnourished that their mouths were literally rotting from scurvy. He describes this sickening scene in Beirut, where he'd go to these glittering high society parties and then walk outside to see city carts just collecting the bodies of people who had starved to death in the streets. He came to a bitter conclusion. The empire wasn't a ruler here. It was just an unpaid farm and street guard. To try and make sense of this colossal, pointless loss of human life, Atay uses this incredibly powerful metaphor. He stops talking about armies and divisions, and instead he just talks about Ahmed. It's a single symbolic name for all the thousands upon thousands of faceless Anatolian peasant boys who were sent into the desert to die for these fantasies they couldn't even comprehend. And this might be the single most devastating line in the entire book. It just perfectly captures the complete and utter waste of it all. All those lives, hundreds of thousands of them, they weren't sacrificed for some noble cause or a brilliant victory. No, they were gambled away, thrown away carelessly by leaders playing a high-stakes game. So after all this, what's the book's final takeaway? Well, it's a stark, brutal warning about how catastrophic decisions are really made. Because behind all the grand speeches about destiny and glory, Atay discovered a reason for the war that was both shocking and just depressingly mundane. Years after the war, someone asked Cemal Pasha, why? Why did the empire really go to war? Was it for glory, for the caliphate, for that great Turkish empire? And Cemal Pasha's answer was just brutally honest. To give out salaries. The government was broke, the treasury was empty, they needed cash, and picking a side in the war was the only way to get a loan. Just think about that. A 600-year-old empire was destroyed, and countless Ahmeds died to make payroll. Now, you might think a book this critical, this harsh, would have been buried. But it was just the opposite. It was hailed as an absolute masterpiece. The leading literary figures in Turkey at the time praised its fearless honesty, its sharp style, and its raw power. They knew that Atay had done more than just write history. He had captured a profound, painful truth about the nation's trauma. In the end, Atay's whole book serves as this incredible warning, a plea to future generations to always balance that love for your country with cold, hard, clear-eyed reason. He saw firsthand what happens when leaders throw facts out the window in favor of fantasy, when patriotism becomes totally unmoored from reality. The result is always ruin. And that leaves us with the same haunting question Atay's book forces us to confront, one that's just as relevant today as it was in 1932. What happens when leaders ignore one for the other?